Deep within the savanna of southern Africa, a colossal labyrinth of granite rises from the earth in defiant silence. Walls towering over 30 feet high snake across the landscape, their stones fitted with such astonishing precision that not a single drop of mortar binds them. This is Great Zimbabwe, a monumental stone city that stood as the beating heart of a vast medieval empire. For centuries, its sheer existence challenged the deeply entrenched prejudices of the outside world, holding secrets that would eventually shatter the foundations of colonial historical narratives. The sheer magnitude of the complex defies casual observation, demanding profound reverence from anyone who walks its ancient corridors. Covering nearly 1,800 acres, the ruins are divided into 3 distinct architectural zones, each whispering tales of immense wealth, sophisticated engineering, and centralized political power. At its zenith, this metropolis housed up to 18,000 people, making it one of the largest ancient settlements on the African continent. Yet the true marvel lay not just in its size, but in the identity of its visionary architects. When European explorers first stumbled upon the granite monoliths in the late 19th century, they were entirely unprepared for the architectural majesty that confronted them. Conditioned by an era of aggressive imperial expansion, these early observers simply could not reconcile the grandeur of the ruins with the indigenous populations living nearby. Instead of acknowledging the obvious brilliance of local statecraft, they immediately began weaving fantastical narratives to explain away the uncomfortable reality of an advanced African civilization. Driven by cognitive dissonance, colonial administrators attributed the magnificent structures to anyone but the native inhabitants. Wild theories rapidly gained traction, suggesting the city was the legendary Ophir, built by the Queen of Sheba, or perhaps a lost outpost of wandering Phoenicians. Expeditions were funded not to uncover the truth, but to aggressively seek out the phantom artifacts of Mediterranean or Middle Eastern builders. The earth was violently turned, and countless genuine archaeological layers were destroyed in a desperate bid to validate a deeply flawed mythology. The turning point in debunking these deeply ingrained colonial myths arrived with the rigorous application of modern archaeological science in the early 20th century. Defying the political pressures of the era, meticulous researchers bypassed the heavily looted central ruins and systematically excavated the untouched peripheral areas. The findings from these undisturbed stratigraphic layers were as undeniable as they were controversial to the ruling establishment. Every piece of evidence, every shard of pottery, and every buried foundation pointed unequivocally to a singular indigenous origin. The science declared with absolute certainty that the monumental stone city was the exclusive creation of the Shona people, specifically the ancestors of the modern Karanga dialect group. The architecture was not an imported anomaly, but the spectacular culmination of a long, localized tradition of stone building that had evolved over generations. The granite blocks were quarried from the surrounding hills, shaped by African hands, and assembled through indigenous engineering principles that required absolutely no foreign intervention. The mastery of this indigenous construction reaches its absolute zenith in the structure known as the Great Enclosure. Here, an outer wall stretches over 800 feet in circumference, reaching heights of nearly 32 feet, and boasting a thickness of 16 feet at its base. The builders utilized a technique called dry stone walling, meticulously stacking naturally fracturing granite slabs without any binding agent. The stability of these massive, curved walls relies entirely on gravity, friction, and an unparalleled understanding of load-bearing geometry. Within the protective embrace of the Great Enclosure stands the conical tower, a solid, mortarless cylinder of stone rising 30 feet into the sky. Its purpose remains a subject of intense scholarly debate, with theories ranging from a symbolic grain bin representing the ruler's largesse to a purely phallic emblem of dynastic power. Regardless of its specific function, the tower stands as a testament to an architectural vision that favored sweeping, organic curves over rigid, linear angles, seamlessly blending the built environment with the natural topography. Beyond the monumental architecture, the daily rhythm of this metropolis between the 11th–15th centuries was driven by a highly sophisticated, diversified economy. At the foundation of their immense wealth was cattle. In the savanna ecosystem, immense herds were not merely a food source, but a living currency, a measure of profound political power and social status. The elite rulers managed these vast herds, utilizing them to forge alliances, secure loyalties, and consolidate their absolute authority over the sprawling territory. While cattle formed the bedrock of domestic power, it was the international gold trade that propelled the empire onto the global stage. The surrounding plateau was rich in alluvial gold and deep reef deposits, which local miners extracted using fire-setting techniques and iron tools. This precious metal was carefully weighed, smelted, and transported along well-established routes to the eastern coast of the continent. There, it flowed into the vibrant maritime networks of the Swahili trading cities, transforming the inland capital into a nexus of global commerce. The sheer scale of this commercial network becomes breathtakingly apparent when examining the exotic artifacts unearthed from the deep soil of the ruins. Archaeologists have recovered delicate Celadon pottery from Ming Dynasty China, intricately painted faience from Persia, and glass beads minted in the furnaces of Syria and India. These distant treasures, resting quietly in the heart of southern Africa, map a medieval world far more interconnected than traditional histories ever dared to acknowledge. The stone walls did not isolate the empire. They served as the secure vault for a cosmopolitan trading hub. High above the bustling valley floor, the hill complex served as the spiritual and political nerve center of the empire. Perched on a steep, rocky outcropping, this fortress-like sanctuary was the exclusive domain of the king and the highest religious figures. The natural boulders were ingeniously incorporated into the defensive walls, creating a labyrinth of narrow passages and hidden enclosures. From this elevated vantage point, the ruler could observe the sprawling city below, projecting an aura of divine authority and unassailable power. It was within the sacred precincts of the hill complex that the most iconic artifacts of the civilization were discovered. The Zimbabwe birds, carved from soft green soapstone, these 8 stylized avian figures, each perched atop a tall column, are believed to represent royal ancestors or powerful spirit mediums. With their raptor-like beaks and human-like toes, they blur the line between the natural and supernatural worlds. They served as silent sentinels, bridging the gap between the living king and the divine forces that legitimized his reign. The spiritual weight of those soapstone carvings permeated every level of society. The ruler was not merely a political administrator. He was the vital conduit to the ancestors, responsible for ensuring the rains fell and the earth remained fertile. The monumental architecture itself was likely an expression of this sacred kingship, a physical manifestation of the order and prosperity brought about by divine favor. The silence of the ruins today belies the vibrant rhythmic ceremonies that once echoed against the granite, appealing to the unseen forces of the cosmos. The influence of this sacred kingship radiated far beyond the immediate valley, giving rise to a sprawling political network that dominated the region. Dozens of smaller regional stone enclosures were constructed across the plateau, serving as provincial administrative centers. These secondary settlements mirrored the architectural style of the capital, creating a unified cultural landscape that stretched for hundreds of miles. The rulers at the center dictated the flow of commerce and tribute, binding disparate communities into a cohesive, formidable state. Modern historical analysis of this network reveals a deeply nuanced understanding of indigenous statecraft. Authority was maintained not solely through military coercion, but through a complex system of patronage, religious obligation, and the strategic redistribution of wealth. The king held the monopoly on the most lucrative exports, particularly ivory and precious metals, doling out prestige goods to regional chiefs to ensure their continued allegiance. It was a delicate, highly effective balancing act that sustained the empire's dominance for nearly 4 centuries. Yet despite its immense wealth and profound political stability, the golden age of the metropolis eventually drew to a close. By the late 15th century, the massive stone walls were gradually abandoned and the bustling trade networks fell silent. The exact catalyst for this monumental societal shift remains one of the most compelling enigmas of the continent's history. There are no signs of catastrophic warfare, no ash layers indicating a violent sacking, and no written records to detail the final days of the central authority. The most widely accepted theory among contemporary researchers points to a slow, devastating environmental crisis. The sheer concentration of up to 18,000 people, along with their massive herds of cattle, likely placed an unbearable strain on the fragile savanna ecosystem. Overgrazing would have stripped the land of its protective grasses, while the insatiable demand for firewood to fuel the domestic hearths and smelting furnaces led to widespread deforestation. The very environment that had nurtured the empire's rise was slowly being consumed by its own spectacular success. Compounding this ecological degradation was a fatal shift in the geopolitical landscape of the wider region. The lucrative mercantile routes, the lifeblood of the capital's international power, began to bypass the city. New commercial networks emerged further north, closer to the Zambezi River, drawing the wealth and focus of the coastal merchants away from the southern plateau. As the economic foundation crumbled, the central authority could no longer sustain the complex patronage systems that held the vast empire together. The abandonment was not a sudden collapse, but a strategic, deliberate migration. The inhabitants did not vanish, they simply moved their political centers to more fertile and strategically advantageous locations. The legacy of the great kings fractured into powerful successor states, which continued the traditions of stone building and international commerce. The ancient capital was left to the encroaching wilderness, its towering walls serving as a silent, enduring monument to a bygone era of unparalleled prosperity. For centuries, the creeping vegetation sought to reclaim the granite monuments, wrapping the silent corridors in a shroud of vines and thickets. The site transitioned from a bustling epicenter of global exchange into a sacred, ancestral ruin, revered by local communities but largely forgotten by the wider world. It slept through the rise and fall of subsequent kingdoms, holding its structural integrity with a quiet, unyielding defiance against the ravages of time and weather. When the shadow of foreign domination finally fell across the plateau, the sleeping city was violently thrust back into the global consciousness. The subsequent looting and the desperate attempts to strip the site of its true heritage were profound historical injustices, driven by an ideology that weaponized archaeology to justify subjugation. The magnificent stone walls were subjected to a relentless campaign of intellectual erasure, their true builders denied the credit for their own spectacular achievements. The gradual dismantling of these colonial fabrications was a profound triumph for historical truth. The irrefutable archaeological evidence proving indigenous origin served as a definitive rebuke to the machinery of imperial propaganda. The undeniable reality of the true builders forced the global historical establishment to finally recognize the sophistication, agency, and undeniable brilliance of medieval African civilizations. It was a reclamation of a stolen past, restoring dignity to the silent stones that had weathered centuries of deliberate misinterpretation. The ultimate vindication of this lost legacy lies in the enduring spirit of the descendants who never forgot their ancestral triumph. The very name of the region, derived from a traditional phrase meaning houses of stone, serves as a permanent linguistic monument to the architects of the past. It is a powerful, symbolic resurrection, elevating the archaeological site from a disputed ruin to the foundational bedrock of cultural identity. The iconic soapstone birds, though once stolen and scattered by imperial hands, remain the indelible emblems of a civilization that refused to be erased. Today, the colossal granite walls stand not as a forgotten mystery, but as a triumphant testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Great Zimbabwe remains an enduring beacon of a continent's rich, complex past, challenging us to look beyond the biased narratives of recent centuries and acknowledge the profound depth of indigenous history. The mortarless stones, fitted perfectly by ancient hands, continue to hold the weight of an empire, whispering the undeniable truth of Africa's lost stone city to anyone willing to listen.